Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Terumos, Chapter 3, Halacha 2. This is part 1 of the shiur. This will be a two-part shiur, and as you can hear, I'm in the Kollel today in Devar Yerushalayim. So we learned in the beginning of Masechet Terumos, it's actually going to be in the first Mishnah, that when you're separating out Truma Gedola, it has to be yours, right? It has to belong to you. You can't separate something from someone else's property. Now, the case is going to be, well, what happens if you have two farmers and they co-own a pile of wheat? And, can one partner separate out Truma not only for his own wheat, but also for his business partner? This is going to get into a lot of complexity because what if one is going to be a chaver, which means he follows the laws accurately on how to do tithes and separations and keeping things from becoming temeh, which is impure. And the other issue is going to be, what if the guy is an am haaretz? He doesn't keep those laws. And you have one who's a chaver who follows and one who doesn't. That's going to be an issue. Another issue is going to be, well, what happens if both of them are chaverim? Can this one separate for that one? So that's what we're going to be getting in today. Again, really, we know that you can't separate truma from someone else's produce without his consent, and the Mishnah is going to deal with this where you're going to co-own the produce in partnership with someone else. Now, certainly you can take out from your own question, your own tithe, but the question is, can you take out for your partner? So the Mishnah says regarding partners who separated truma one after the other, Rabbi Akiva says both of their trumas are truma, and each is truma in part. But the sages say the truma of the first partner is truma in the entirety, and the truma of the second partner is not truma at all. Now, this is going to be a maloket between Rabbi Akiva and the sages, and in particular, this is a question about if the one is a chaver and the other is an am haaretz, what's going to be the status? Now, the point here is not whether we can, presume that one partner is going to consent to the other partner's tithing. And the idea is that, after the partners divided the produce between themselves, then, you have a case where, each has sole ownership of the specific portion. So then, there'd be no worry that one consents to the other's tithing. And the fact is that, they once owned the produce in partnership. And the case that the Mishnah is talking about here is where the grain has it where the produce is jointly owned. It's before they split up the ownership. Let's say I own 50%, you own 50%. So if we didn't tithe it yet, and we just go ahead and say, okay, here's your 50% and here's my 50%, and now I tithe from my side, and you're going to do whatever you're going to do. Okay, fine, right? But that's not what this case is. This case is where the whole pile is there, and we're both partners. We own both. We both own 50% of the grain inside of that pile, and now one decides to tithe for the other. So there's another Tana's opinion. Rabbi Yosef says in this Mishnah, if the first partner separated an appropriate amount of truma, the truma of the second partner is not truma at all. But if the first partner did not separate out an appropriate amount of truma, the truma of the second partner is truma in part as it is that of the first partner. So the Mishnah doesn't explain what Rabbi Yosef means when he's referring to an appropriate amount of truma. The Gemara is going to say what that actually is. And Rabbi Kanievsky says about this in his Beur, he's saying that Rabbi Yosef's point is that the truma designation of the first partner is deemed to be totally effective, and therefore the latter partner's designation is totally ineffective. So only if the former separated a certain specific quantity of truma that would allow us to presume his partner's consent. And so if the first partner separated a different quantity, then the consent of the second partner can't be presumed. And so the idea is that his designation is ineffective because you're presuming that the other partner would allow that different amount to be separated. So, for example, where would this come up? Well, we know that it's normally going to be about 2% by estimate, but you can give more. What if the guy wants to separate out 3%, 4%? Okay, well, now if I'm doing it on behalf of the partner might come along and say, I would only accept 2%. Now you're giving 4%? I don't accept that. So that's Rabbi Yossi's point. So it's a long Mishnah, and we're going to get back into Rabbi Akiva and the sages. And Rabbi Akiva is going to be saying that a partner's truma designation on behalf of jointly owned produce is going to be effective only for his own share. And the Mishnah is going to explain this a little bit. So, in the last portion, it would seem, when we're talking about Rabbi Yossi, about the case where the first partner did not give total consent over the amount that would be given. So Rabbi Akiva says, in what case are these words of Rabbi Akiva stated that the truma separation of one partner is ineffective for the other partner's share? Again, looks like now it's relating back to what Rabbi Yossi says. And it says, where the separator did not speak to his partner and receive explicit permission to separate truma on behalf of his partner's share. Rather, he just presumed his partner's consent, and Rabbi Akiva is deeming that to be unwarranted. And the Mishnah continues and says, if, however, one expressly authorized his partner, or even a member of his household, or even a slave or a maidservant separate truma, that person's truma is fully valid truma. In other words, he made an agent. In other words, if the Rambam is going to say about this in his commentary in the Mishnah, that if the crop owner explicitly gave permission to the householder's attendant, or his slave, or his maidservant to separate truma, and certainly if he had a partner whom he gave permission to separate truma on behalf of the entire crop, that is going to be effective. But we're dealing here where the partner never actually received permission to tithe jointly owned produce. And in the case where he did get permission, even Rabbi Akiva would agree, okay, that's going to be truma. That's going to be fine because you've effectively made your partner the agent. But we're dealing here with what happens where one partner doesn't effectively become an agent of the other partner to separate truma. That's going to be the deeper insight. So the idea is that somebody can authorize another person to separate truma from the produce, again, turning somebody into an agent. And the Mishnah now talks about the opposite case. How does this authorization to turn somebody into the agent now get withdrawn? How do you undo it? So the Mishnah says, if after assigning an agent to separate truma from his produce, the owner nullifies the agency, the law is as follows. It says, if he nullified the agency before the agent separated out truma, then the agent's truma is not valid truma. But if he nullified the agency after the agent already separated out the truma, then that agent's truma is valid truma. We see this, by the way, in Gittin, right? If somebody gives an agent the consent, the permission to go deliver a get, and if he withdraws the consent before the get is delivered, then he's no longer the agent. But if the agent already did what he was contracted to do, already given permission to do, and he delivered the get, that's going to be a valid get. The same too over here. If the agent already performed the act that he was asked to do, he's already done it, then it's going to be valid. You can't undo it. Now, the Mishnah is going to talk about whether a worker can separate truma from produce for his employer. And this is going to be without the employer's knowledge. And again, what happens if you have a haver worker and he's picking olives or he's picking figs? He's picking figs, and the owner is an am haaretz. And now, you have produce that, you want to tithe because you have a pile that's already there, ready to be processed. And, you can't really give it to the am haaretz because he's going to make it temeh, or maybe he's not going to tithe it properly. Can the haver do it? That's going to be the question. So workers, says this Mishnah, do not have authority to separate truma for their employer's produce, except for the treaders of grapes at the winepress, who are empowered to separate truma even without the express permission. Why? Because the owners will convey truma to the contents of the wine press as soon as the production of wine is underway. So once it becomes tamei, that's going to eliminate the possibility of separating out truma. You're supposed to separate out truma from something that's tahor. So because of this consideration, the wine shredders are basically, the custom is that they're granted authority. It's presumed that they're granted authority to separate out truma as soon as they start to work, even if they didn't get explicit permission to do it. So this mission is referring to a case where the crop owner is an am haaretz and he hires workers who are very careful on the laws of tuma and tahara, which makes them chavarim. And the rabbis are decreeing, says the Rambam, that the tuma on the person of an am haaretz, so that if he touches something, he's turning it, whatever he's touching, he's turning it to be tamei. So that the owner of the grapes, if he's going to touch these grapes or the wine, that the produce now becomes tamei. So if the produce is still tevel at the time, it would no longer be possible for them to separate out the truma that's going to be tahor. That's the ideal way it's done. And so it's reasonable to assume that the reason am haaretz, owner of the grapes, is going to be hiring chavarim to press the grapes rather than just pressing them himself, or hiring other am haaretz so to press it, is that he wants the workers to separate the truma as quickly as possible, and also to keep it tahor. So this is a case where maybe the guy's not learned enough to follow the laws of being, tahor, but he does care about making sure the wine goes in a state of tahara to a cone, which is the way it's supposed to go. But he himself maybe didn't learn enough to do it and keep it tahor. But he cares about it, so he hires chavarim. So this is going to be a case where, if you're dealing with figs, and the guy's picking figs, he's not going to be able to separate out truma without the employer's express consent. But if he's doing something like the wine press, that's going to be a case where he's hired these chavarim to do it in a state of tahara. He doesn't want to disqualify the grapes or the wine. And so that's a case where he doesn't need permission. Why? Because it's implied. That's the custom. Let's get into the Gemara. And it starts off talking about this disagreement between Rabbi Akiva and the sages in this mission about whether one partner can separate truma on behalf of the entire shared crop. Again, we're not talking about a case where the grain gets split 50-50. It's before that happens. Now, what's going to be the way this dispute comes about? And the Gemara asks and says, what case are we dealing with? It says, if it's where the partners are proficient in the laws of truma separation, even Rabbi Akiva would agree that either of the partners can separate truma on behalf of the entire crop. And we can assume that the other partner consents to that separation. Why? Because he's a haver. He also cares about separating it accurately. So the Gemara says that if the mission is dealing with a case where the partners are not proficient in the laws of truma, then even the rabbis would agree that the partners can separate truma only on behalf of their own respective share, and then if the partner doesn't have the consent of the other partner to separate out truma, then that's not going to work. So, if the partners are not proficient, and then you're going to have a case where neither one knows how to separate it. So then the first partner's designation is not going to be effective for the entire crop, even if the second partner says that he doesn't object. Why? Because in a way it's an unauthorized separation of truma that doesn't have any validity, even if the second owner says it has satisfaction, because the guy doesn't know how to separate it out proficiently. He doesn't know the laws of truma separation. And so the guy can't do it accurately. Because he can't do it accurately, even if the other guy consents to it, neither one of them know how to do it. So they're saying it's not really a truma separation. So what case are we dealing with in this Mishnah? We're dealing with a case where one of them knows how to do it, one of the partners knows how to do it, and the second partner is clueless. He's an am haaretz, he doesn't know at all how to do it. So again, it's not going to be where both partners are havarim, and it's going to be presumed that the other partner is going to care, and both are going to have accurate knowledge and practice on how to separate out Truma Gedola accurately and properly. We're not dealing with a case where neither one of them have any clue on how to do it, even if they both consent. We're dealing with a case where one is an Amaretz and one is a Haver. That's what we're dealing with. And so the Gemara is going to explain the context of this. It's going to say, the Gemara says, what case are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a case where the proficiency of each partner is unknown to the other partner. In other words, the Malokit between Rabbi Akiva and the Tanna Kama is going to be where the kind of situation where Rabbi Akiva says in this Gemara that people of unknown proficiency are typically assumed not to be proficient. And here we can presume that the partners do not have the other's consent as to separate Truma. But the rabbis are saying that the typical assumption regarding people of unknown proficiency is that they are proficient. In other words, this gets into like Demai, when Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol organized the laws of Demai, he saw that the majority was separating out Truma Gedola. And that's what the rabbis are going on. The rabbis are going on saying, well, we can see here for Truma Gedola that the majority is separating it. So even if you don't know the proficiency level of this guy, you can assume that he knows how to separate it out. So accordingly, the Truma separation of the first partner would be fully effective as he's presumed to have the other partner's consent. And having clarified under what circumstance Rabbi Akiva and the sages disagree, the Gemara is going to explain the ramifications of Rabbi Akiva's ruling. He's saying, the Gemara says, according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that each partner's Truma separation is only partially effective. The following comes up. It says, regarding the sa'ah of produce that was designated as Truma by the first partner, half of it is valid Truma, and the other half is tevel with respect to all obligations, including the Truma obligation. So, when the first partner takes a sa'ah of produce and designates it as Truma, his intent is to rectify the entire pile, all of it. So Rabbi Akiva is maintaining that he's successful only with regard to his own share of the produce, only 50%. And within there's still going to be tevel, that's going to belong to the other partner. He didn't tithe the other partner's share. He only tithed what he himself did. And so at this point, the Gemara is believing that the half sa'ah that belongs to the second partner remains tevel. Even if the second partner has separated another sa'ah of Truma, the idea is that he's only intending to rectify the produce in front of him at that time, not that which has been removed by the first partner. That's what the Rosh is saying. So the idea would be that, okay, this is a case of uncertainty. You don't know the proficiency. But this would also be a case where, one is an Amaretz and one is a partner, and for whatever reason, the partner went to go separate for the Amaretz. And what this is saying is fencing in the partner, basically saying that, look, only your share is tithe, and what you took out is not a valid tithe on behalf of the Amaretz. He has to consent to it, and he doesn't understand enough to know how to consent. And the other case would be where the Amaretz separates out for himself. In other words, he's an Amaretz, but he's going to be in this class of people that is very careful about separating out Truma Gedola. And he's going to now take out for the Haver. Well, the problem with that is going to be that he can separate out for himself, but the Haver really can't rely on his separation because maybe the guy is not accurate on separating it out. So then it even makes a suffix on the Amaretz's separation as well. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say regarding the sa'ah of produce that was designated as Truma by the second partner, half of it's Truma and the other half is tevel with respect to Maestros alone. So the Rosh is saying that half of the sa'ah that was separated by the second partner, specifically half that belongs to him, is valid Truma because he rectifies his share of the produce. And the remaining half sa'ah, which belongs to the first partner, has already been rectified by the first partner. It's Truma separation. So it has the same status as the rest of the produce. That's going to be tevel. And it's tevel with respect to the Meiser obligation, but not with respect to the Truma. Now, the Gemara is going to look at the preceding statement, and it's going to look at it more. It's going to say that this ruling is not needed except in regard to the question of what exactly the second partner's Truma designation rectifies. So in other words, that it should seem obvious with regard to the second partner's designation that half, that belongs to him is now Truma if he separates it out, and he's rectifying his share of the produce, and that, the other half would be tevel with respect to Meiser because the Truma obligation was already discharged by the first partner. And likewise, regarding the Sa'ah designated by the first partner, that half belongs to him, is now Truma, since he rectified his own share of the produce. So what's going to be the novelty of this ruling? It's going to be that the other half of the Sa'ah designated by the first partner, in other words, the half that belongs to the second partner, is fully tevel. And that's based upon the assumption that the Truma designation of the second partner, where he's rectifying only the tevel of the produce in front of him, not the half sa'ah that was removed earlier by the first partner. So the Gemara is saying that concerning the half sa'ah share of the second partner within the portion that he designated as Truma, what is the law with regard to whether he discharges the Truma obligation of the half sa'ah that is presently in the hands of the first partner? And basically it's going to be asking, do we assume that the second partner intended to rectify only the produce that's now in front of him, and therefore his half sa'ah within the portion is going to be on the other partner's side is going to be fully tevel? Or are you going to say that maybe the second partner had in mind to rectify all the produce, whatever it may be, in which case the half sa'ah that's in front of him is also going to be exempted from the Truma obligation? So the Gemara is going to conclude that the Truma designation of the second partner, in fact, does rectify his entire share, including the half sa'ah within the portion separated by the first partner. And the Gemara says, let us infer this law from the following incident. And it says that a certain individual named Ariston once brought a sack full of tevel fruit, and when unloading it, he unknowingly left some of the sack, and he separated Truma from the fruits that were piled in front of him. And then after discovering that some of the fruits remained in the sack and were forgotten somewhere else, he was unsure whether the Truma obligation has been discharged by the earlier separation. And the incident came before Rabbi Yossi for the ruling, and he said that there is a presumption that Ariston separated Truma on behalf of all the fruit, even if some of it was left in the sack. And this same principle would apply in our case where the second partner separates Truma, he presumably intended to rectify all of the produce, including the half sa'ah that now happens to be in the hands of the first partner. So the Rosh is going to explain this conclusion like this, that the status of the portion separated by each of the partners is identical. Half of it's Truma, and the other half is tevel. But that's going to be tevel with respect to Meiser alone. Again, why is that? Well, because we're dealing with a person of unknown level for separating out Truma. So if the guy is an Am Haaretz, he's going to separate out Truma Gedola accurately, but it's presumed he's not going to separate out the Meiser accurately. He's not going to separate out Truma Meiser accurately. So basically what happened is you create a situation where the guy goes ahead and creates demai. He has it where the first tithe is taken out correctly, but you can't rely on him to take out the second and third tithe. So only in the case where the two partners are chavers is that designation going to be valid for Truma Meiser or Meiser, because you can assume the guy is a haver. He knows how to separate out, Trumas Meisros. But where the guy is unknown, you can assume that he's taken out the Truma Gedola accurately, but you can't assume that he's taken out the next set of tithes accurately. And so that's why you have to assume that it's going to be tevel with respect to all the other sets of ties with regards to Meiser. Because again, this is a classic Demai situation. You have a guy of unknown learning coming and separating out ties. He does the first part accurately like what the majority is doing, but he doesn't know how to accurately calculate out the next set. And so we're going to be treating the second set of separations as a case of Demai. And so he's got to go get a chaver to go separate out the Terumos Meiser accurately. And we're going to get into part 2 tomorrow. Have a great day.